All right, guys, I'm going to try to fly through this really quickly. To be honest with you, I just recorded once and I ran out of time, so we're going to do this faster. So I'm not going to go through the causes of the Protestant Reformation. You're responsible to know that. We went over in class. You're responsible for Martin Luther, all of those things. What I want to talk about right now is the impacts of the Protestant Reformation. Before we get started with that, though, I want you guys to be aware. I know that today we talked about, I know in class we talked about Calvinism and we talked about Lutheranism, and I mentioned something about Zwingli, and don't worry about Anglicanism. I don't want you to worry about the differences between those. They're not really that important. What is important is that you understand the tone of what's going on and understand about that Protestant work ethic and how that's going to create like joint stock companies and different ways of kind of dealing with the colonies and exploration. And we're going to come back to that later on, so I don't want to spend any time on that. I do want to spend very quickly on this idea of the impact. So in class today, we spent about 30 seconds on the Catholic Reformation. And I want to spend a little bit more time on that. I want to make you aware of what happened. The Catholic Reformation is going to take place during the 1530s. And all it was a response to the Protestant Reformation. And what the Catholic Church is trying to do during this time, very, very simply, is they are trying to, they're trying to keep their members in, and they're trying to stop the spread of Protestantism, right? The enemy of Catholicism is going to be Protestantism. So what they're going to do is they're going to try their best to make sure that it doesn't spread. So the way that they're going to do that is they're going to try to create some reforms within the Catholic Church, but not to take away from what they're doing. So remember, whatever things I tell you they're doing, they're still going to keep the same kinds of ideas, and they're going to keep the same rituals, but they're going to try to get away from some of those things that people are upset about. Namely, these are the things that are going to change. One, they're going to get rid of indulgences. Indulgences, they realize, are not going to be good. It doesn't work. As people are becoming more educated, they realize that the scripture is more important and people can read the Bible. So that's one. Two, they're going to change the way that priests become priests. So no more simony, right, where they could buy their way into the priesthood. You must be educated at seminary if you want to become a priest. There is no more nepotism. You basically have to earn your way into the church. It's not going to be allowed anymore where where you could just become a priest because you have money. So that idea of anti-clericalism is something that the church is really going to focus their efforts on. It doesn't mean that priests are not going to be, allowed to not be celibate anymore. Celibacy still is going to be something that's going to be very strong. They're still going to have their roles. But the big thing that they want is they want priests to be priests. They want them not to be taking over different churches or doing things that were immoral, like drinking or, all of the things that we talked about in class. They want them to act as priests and as religious leaders. So they're going to change the nature of the way that that's going to work. And that's an important thing. So the big changes is no more indulgences, and priests are going to have to be qualified to become priests, and they're going to have to actually pay attention to their congregants. Okay? In addition to the reforms they're going to make into the church, there's other actions they're going to take. One of the things that they're going to do is they're going to create something called the Ursuline Order. By the way, you should be taking notes. Please tell me you're taking notes. The Ursuline Order. And the Ursuline Order was a way for the Catholic Church to educate women. A lot of the women's schools, Catholic schools in the United States, are part of what's called the Ursuline Order. And it's a way to educate women about Catholicism. And the idea is that if women are educated in Catholicism, they're going to teach their children about being Catholic. And if they teach their children about Catholic, you now have more members into the church. Next. Then they're going to create the Jesuits. And the Jesuits you read about in the textbook, I know that. Remember that the Jesuits are kind of like recruiters for the church. They are the people that go out there and they're going to go get members. So they're going to send Jesuits to the Eastern Hemisphere, places like India, and they're actually going to send a few to Japan, but they're going to be very unsuccessful. But they're going to send a lot of Jesuits to the Americas to try to recruit. They're also going to use the Jesuits as a way to enforce Catholicism, and they're going to do things like they're going to have something called the Roman Inquisition, and the Roman Inquisition is going to take those people that have converted to Protestantism or leaders of the Protestant church, not Calvin and not Luther, but they're going to take those people and they're going to excommunicate them from Christianity, or they'll go as far as execution of those people. But it's this Roman Inquisition. The Jesuits are going to be sent to places like the Netherlands to kind of enforce this. And it is bloody and it's violent. In the Netherlands, they had something called the Council of Blood, which was set out to try to control the Protestants there. So it's this big kind of movement to try to control what's going on. Additionally to the Jesuits and the Ursuline Order, they also create a list of books that they did not want people looking at. It was called, I'll tell you right now, it was called something. It was called something called the List of Prohibited Books. And they basically were books that people felt, that the Catholic Church felt that was damaging to them. So they would burn those books. That's what that picture is. The burning of those books is going to be very, very important, because this idea of not spreading the ideas of Catholicism, of Protestantism. So, like Luther's 95 Thesis, things like that. You can see that the printing press is so important. People are becoming more literate because of the printing press, and as it happens, the Catholic Church has to control information a little bit more. So the Catholic Reformation, just so that you understand, is not going to be super successful. It takes too long to get it rolling. It takes too much time to get things going. So they're going to lose membership, but they are going to make efforts to reform the church. That's why many of the things that go on in the church today are very different than when we learned about earlier in the week, where, priests were doing whatever they wanted. Okay? Other impacts of the Protestant Reformation that I want you to be aware of is, one, the political instability in Europe. We're actually going to come back to that later on, but we talked about that a little bit. Keep this map in mind, but you're going to have a lot of political upheaval as a result of the Protestant Reformation, because monarchs are going to try to really separate themselves from the Holy Roman Empire, and you're eventually going to have the 30 Years' War, which we'll get to later. So politically, we could see that. And what people and what governments are going to do, especially princes, is they're going to align themselves with Protestantism just so they can get away from the Pope. And this way they can have more power and more authority. Okay? In terms of art and culture, you're going to see a lot of things. I showed this to a couple classes today. One of the things that the church is going to do, and a Catholic church is going to do in an attempt to try to bring people back to the church, is they're going to make art more feeling and more passionate, but really a reflection of Catholicism, a reflection of the church. So the type of art is going to kind of change as well during this time period. In terms of the family, Protestants are going to be very big into family, because reverends and pastors, leaders of their churches, are going to be allowed to marry. So the family dynamic is always going to remain the same. Catholics and Protestants are going to maintain that family dynamic. But the one part that I do want to talk about is the role of women. Women within the Protestant faith are not going to gain rights. And I need that to be very, very important. They're going to play a major role in the family. They're going to all be educated about religion, whether they're Catholic or Protestant. They're all going to have those things. But what I do need you to understand is that they're still not going to be given rights. They're not going to have political freedoms. They're not going to be acknowledged. During this time period, women are not going to be treated really any better than before. In fact, in many Protestant cities, prostitutes are going to be executed because they don't go along with the morality of the church. There's a lot of that goes on. But the part that I wanted to talk about really deals with the European witch hunts. And we're not going to spend too much time on it in this video. If you have questions you want to talk about it after school, witch hunts are going to be prominent in both Europe and the Americas. And the nature of them are all kind of the same. The women that are going to be targeted, the reason why women are going to be targeted is for a few reasons. One, there's a high level of misogyny in Europe. What I mean by that is it's a patriarchal society where women are always looked at as inferior. Two, there's enormous amounts of chaos during the 16th century and the 17th century because of the Protestant Reformation, because of the religious wars, because of religious upheaval. It's just going to be chaos. And lastly, women were just an easy target. And I want you to understand what this means, is that the women that were targeted were generally single women, either older women who were caretakers of families or younger women who were like nursemaids. And I want you to think of the modern depiction of a witch. The modern depiction of a witch, she's usually riding a broom, like she sweeps the floor. She's usually wearing darker clothing. She's usually dirty. Many times she's a homely woman, a woman who's not married, who's single. You never saw witches that were married. So a lot of those stereotypes that we look at the modern day witch is what you saw during that time. And women were targeted specifically because of their roles in society. These women that were targeted were women that were in charge of a family. So if, God forbid, a child died, or there was an illness in the family, like a bad stomach virus or a flu or what have you, or some kind of calamity that hit the house, well, what better person to blame than the person who's taking care of the home? So women were very much targeted for those kinds of things that went on because they were the ones who were taking care of the house. So there was that clear connection. And this is going to go on in Europe, and it's going to go on in the middle, in the Americas as well, because of this kind of attitude. And it doesn't discriminate. Catholics did it, Protestants did it, educated, uneducated. It didn't matter. Women were treated as unequals, and they were easy scapegoats for problems in society. And because of their roles, if something went wrong in the home, it was always the woman's fault. Okay? So women during this time period, I want you to remember this is going to translate as we go forward. So women were not included in the Renaissance. Women during the Protestant Reformation were looked at as witches and blamed for everything. During the Scientific Revolution, you're going to see women were not acknowledged for any of their achievements. During the Enlightenment, women were not included. It was all about men. It doesn't really change until we get into the 19th century where women are really acknowledged. They're given political rights and things like that. So a continuity of this course is that in Europe, women are always treated as inferiors. And we see that today and obviously in modern society. I encourage you to look up information about the witch hunts. They're really kind of interesting. They're not super important for this class, but they are an important part of what we're going to be. It's kind of cool to kind of look at and disturbing at the same time. All right, that's it. Tomorrow we're going to start the Age of Exploration. Those of you who are watching this, remember, Friday's our Flannel Friday. So, do what you got to do. And I'll talk to you later.